I really would like to start planning to buy a home, but I have absolutely no way of being able to budget or plan for how much I can afford because I don't know how much I'm going to get paid.
If you weren't taught that, then that's pot luck of how you grew up and who your parents were, which I think is unfair.
Statistically speaking, in the United Kingdom, if you have any of the protected characteristics, you are statistically more likely to have poorer financial health.
I just wanted to touch on what you mentioned about the link between protected characteristics and financial well-being.
I'm really fascinated by how much secrecy still exists around salaries. In the UK, women on average retire with about 40% less in their pensions than men.
There's a culture in law that no one really talks about. The culture of not asking, not questioning, salary secrecy. But this silence comes at a cost. It can create confusion. It can reinforce inequality. It can break trust. And it can keep people stuck. Understanding your worth isn't just about numbers. It's about building a life that works for you. And staying in the dark isn't just disempowering, it's expensive. Today I'm sitting down with Jono Randell-Nash, ex-lawyer turned independent financial advisor for lawyers, and Carla Hoppe, former corporate solicitor, ex-director of international tax and transaction services at EY, and founder of Wealthbright, an award-winning financial education partner helping law firms build financially savvy lawyers. We explore the culture of salary secrecy in law firms, the widespread financial gap across the legal industry, and the key questions lawyers should be asking to take control of their financial well-being. So, Carla, why do you think that money is still such a taboo topic in the legal industry? I think a lot of people don't like talking about their salaries, even if they're high earners or low earners, like no matter where they are on the spectrum, money just seems to be such taboo. Why do you think that is?
I think what we're dealing with, particularly in the UK, is that money, from a sort of British cultural perspective, is still to some extent sort of frowned upon as a topic to talk about openly. But then I think, I'm kind of the belief that actually there are certain aspects of the legal profession which I would say kind of compound that taboo. And I think there's a few things I kind of pick out on this. So one is, I guess, like the legal profession as a whole has a bit of a culture of expertise. And that's not a bad thing when you're thinking about what it means to be a lawyer, because of course you are literally paid to be the expert in the room. You imagine if you walked up to somebody and asked them how much they paid for their house, or how much did they actually earn, or how did they use their last bonus. People see that as quite an affronting type of conversation and they kind of shy away from it.
And I think particularly the point you made about the house is it's always jumped out to me because of the land registry, you know what someone's house is worth. Like, everyone knows it's publicly available information, and yet we don't feel comfortable either asking or telling, even though you know they're going to go and Google it or Zoopla it or whatever as soon as they leave your house. And I think there's that, which is a societal thing rather than law.
And the type of language that people tell us is things like, there's a fear of judgment. It's assumed everybody already knows this. And then the other thing is just like this idea of like, we're all in competition with each other. And so to kind of like ask questions is to somehow show weakness. I'm really kind of fascinated by how much secrecy still exists around salaries. And it's kind of weird to me that this isn't known in the legal sector. And this topic of salary secrecy came up, and it came up in the context of the extreme levels of financial stress and anxiety that are professed from junior lawyers. So we can map where in the career trajectory are people feeling financial stress. And what we tend to see every year is basically a U-curve where peak stress is happening in the period just prior to and immediately after qualification. I really would like to start planning to buy a home, or I'm thinking of moving to another place to live, but I have absolutely no way of being able to budget or plan for how much I can afford because I don't know how much I'm going to get paid. And I'd never made that link before of just how damaging that secrecy can be in preventing people from actually doing the right thing when it comes to making financial goals and making those types of core foundational behaviors around budgeting, saving, and investing in their financial future.
Definitely, because otherwise, if you know what you're earning this year, but I mean, the point you made earlier about the mortgages is a good one, right? Because it's the affordability, and you might have other things coming down the line. I mean, you want to start a family, and you're looking at nursery costs, and you're like, maybe I'll get a pay rise in the next couple of years, where I get promotion. But if you've got no idea what that looks like, planning is an absolute nightmare.
So I struggle a bit because I think actually, and let me, fly the flag for the great employers and good people out there. I don't think, as a general rule, employers want to penalize people or don't want to pay people fairly or equally. I don't think that's the case at all. And I've had people say to me, well, we pay our people extraordinarily well. It's not my job to tell them what to do with their money. And I sort of thought, well, there's a slight disconnect there, right? Because on the one hand, it's not really about how much you get paid. It's about your ability to know and understand how to utilize that pay and maximize that pay.
At the moment, if you don't teach someone how to manage money, you are very much reliant on their background, right? Which isn't an inclusive place to start. Lack of knowledge is the issue, not lack of intelligence, clearly, with all lawyers, right? And I speak to a lot of people, and sometimes the lack of understanding about how basic fundamental financial concepts work is just because they haven't been taught it. You explain it clearly and they go, okay, great, I get it. And you're like, okay, brilliant. But if you weren't taught that, then that's pot luck of how you grew up and who your parents were, which I think is unfair.
So I guess what you're touching on is that link between kind of social capital or socioeconomic status and financial capabilities. We've got loads of data, and I think people should know this. Statistically speaking, in the United Kingdom, if you have any of the protected characteristics, you are statistically more likely to have poorer financial health in the UK. And then also in terms of their overarching kind of understanding around some of the core concepts of like investments and pensions and future planning, there seems to be, I mean, we're talking small numbers at the moment in our data set, but we'll be following this and growing it. But there seems to be an indication that there's a lower level of, I'll call it confidence at this point, because we haven't quite got to the level of saying capability, but confidence in their knowledge around these topics.
I just wanted to touch on what you mentioned about the link between protected characteristics and financial well-being. Why is there a link between that, just out of interest?
Well, I suppose there's a few different threads to that. So let's talk about money and mental health for a moment. There's very strong data that shows if you've got a pre-existing mental health condition, you're 3.5 times more likely to be in problem debt. So very clear, I guess, causality between mental health, pre-existing mental health conditions, and struggling with finances on a day-to-day level. And so mental health obviously is a very wide framing, but it generally encompasses anybody who has a recognized mental health condition. So that could be anything on a spectrum of issues, right? But it does include things like ADHD or autism, or all the way through to like if you've got more serious mental health, depression, maybe you're dealing with OCD or anxiety. So I think on that side of the equation, pre-existing mental health directly impacts on your confidence around managing money day to day. I think to touch on your other protected characteristics, I mean, let's touch on gender for a moment. I mean, there's a huge amount of data between the link between particularly gender financial gaps. So you'll know about the gender pay gap, but actually people are less familiar with things like in the UK, women on average retire with about 40% less in their pensions than men in terms of total asset value. And there's lots of reasons for that. The motherhood penalty is said to contribute up to 80% of the gender financial gaps in the UK. But actually, there's also a piece about educating women around things like risk appetite or investment profiles. I am a woman who at the beginning of my career didn't pay attention to where her pension was going, right? Why? Because I was a bit embarrassed as a lawyer to not really fully understand the swathe of documentation that was presented to me about my pension. I just put my head in the sand and I would be like, default fund? I don't even understand what that word means, but yep, I'm going to roll over my default fund, right?
One of the advisors I know, I haven't coined this term, so I won't claim it, but he calls that box when you start work and you tick the default fund, he calls it the 6-figure tick box, because it can be the difference between picking the right risk profile and picking the default is literally £100,000 plus on your pension statement at the end by the time you stop working. It is something that people don't really talk about. I think there's the sort of the sexy stuff of the investing and like what does that look like, but I think the building blocks to get there in terms of you can't invest unless you've got certain stuff that are set up correctly. So I always bang on about stuff, and I think I'm pretty sure Carl's going to nod along to this, but like emergency fund, step one, something is going to go wrong. You also need to look at insurance for yourself and for any family and any debts that you've got. Just do the building blocks and don't go jump straight in for the fun stuff. And then also building in, what is your future going to look like?
This whole obsession with the six-figure salary. I did a talk to a quantitative trading bank last week, and we touched on this like obsession with the six-figure salary. And I was saying to people, like, just to put it into perspective, it's only 4% of the UK population that earn over £100,000. It's actually a tiny majority of the population.
Wealth is an excess income over what your expenditure is. If you live outside of London and you don't need to have a huge mortgage to get the same house, you can take a much lower salary. You need to work out what you're spending. Like, and I don't mean go through your expenditure and go every £5 of how many preps you're getting, but it's like beginning of the month, end of the month, have you got more money than you started with? That's quite a good starting point. Skylar, I think financial stress overrides everything, and you probably won't do a very good job at work or in relationships or with friendships if you are stressed, because that is fundamentally so key to life and affording your life, like even the basics, that it's going to override everything else.
It's that famous quote, comparison is the thief of joy, right? This applies in this situation. If you would like to contact Jono or Carla, just go to the description of this episode.